how is it reshaping their manufacturing workflows? And more importantly, is how is it impacting the workforce themselves, the humans?
Well, I think that it's really interesting in the manufacturing world because now you're talking about a physical situation, right? It's beyond back office and things like that. You're really talking about physical situations where a combination of, AMRs, sensors, and PLCs, all of that combination of all that data points that you get from these various different machines that are either on the factory line or working with the factory line, that got kind of ability to bring it all together for the first time because of LLMs.
Welcome to another episode of AI Entanglement, and I'm the host, Prem Talreja. And I created this episode with the idea that AI is really moving very rapidly into our work and personal lives, and there are threats, there are opportunities, and I'm a huge fan of AI, that it would be great to talk to experts like the one we have today to discuss the transformational impact of AI. My guest today is Jeanne Beliveau-Dunn, a technology executive, board director, investor, and an entrepreneur with deep expertise in AI, automation, industrial technology, clean energy, and digital transformation, a host of areas she knows well. And currently, as a president and CEO of her company, Claridad, she invests in and advises emerging software companies while serving on the board of major industrial, energy, and AI organizations. Her career bridges the startup ecosystem, the corporate boardroom, giving her a unique perspective on turning innovation into meaningful business impact, which is exactly what we want to learn from her today. She holds an executive MBA from Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, a BS also from MIT, and is a graduate of the Executive Leadership Program for Harvard Business School. So we are very fortunate to have Jeanne today. Welcome, Jeanne.
Thank you.
Great.
Nice to see you.
If I have missed anything, please let me know.
Well, you might also want to say that I'm the chair of a company, Crucial, which is a pure AI company as well.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, with that in mind, coming back to your experience in the industrial sector, the topic today I've chosen is AI hype to industrial impact, or the impact of AI on the industrial industry. How is AI changing the traditional industries that we call as industrial industries, if you may allow me to define it that way, and you're associated with them?
Yeah, well, it really depends on the industry. I would say that most industrial companies are embracing it in some way, shape, or form. They're either embracing it internally in how they do business or in combination with the products and services that they offer. And it really depends on the company. But what I think is pretty common is that most of these organizations at this point have at least figured out their top strategies of where they want to use it, and are going from, if you will, early piloting, early investigation to a point where they're starting to figure out where they're going to put some serious money behind it and actually go for it, take a real transformational view over the next 2 to 3 years and how to deploy it inside of their organizations. And, it looks different in every industry.
Sure. And you mentioned about piloting and then moving into production or deployments. So moving in that line of question, I think that piloting or experimenting and moving to, so is the hurdle or the criteria of measurable business value, or how is it determined why they would use AI?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way we have to all think about AI is it's a transformational technology, and because it's a transformational technology, it has the ability, with proper investment, proper focus, to completely change how these companies are operating, either inside of their products, inside of their services, or just across the corporate infrastructure. And every company and every organization has their internal use cases that are pretty simple and easy, and so they're using it. You could think about it almost like an office application for many uses, right? But that's not the transformational part. That's just the sort of everyday usage that you get out of using such a tool, right? Because it's a democratized tool. It's LLMs are now so deployable and so usable for many types of investigation or research, or just simply using it as a great hub for information. And so when I think about transformation, I think it goes well beyond that.
Yeah.
beyond just sort of an everyday tool that you can use to, give you information that you need to do your business. It could
Yeah.
be, doing some things that are all about, changing the information flow that comes to individuals that are operating these grids, right? To give them new information, new ways of looking at the data, right? In a way that they can actually absorb. Because the problem, the interesting thing about every single one of these industrial applications is there's tons and tons of data, but because there's so much data, there's no way to siphon through it to figure out which pieces of that data, which pieces of the information is important or not. Well, AI is a great way to scale that, right? It's more than just an
Sure.
informational tool. It's a great way to actually investigate and probe into that data, and then at scale be able to isolate the things that are important for humans to be able to take action on, right? And whether or not you want to automate that actions through connecting it to another workflow or not, that's really a matter of progress and time, as you evolve in the landscape of, this transformational effort.
Right, right, right. So these industrial companies in various sectors, but I'm talking about the non-high tech companies, the industrial companies, they are advanced technologies themselves. But what is the possibility of, or how is it reshaping their manufacturing workflows? And more importantly, is how is it impacting the workforce themselves, the humans?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I think that it's really, really interesting, like when you see in the manufacturing world, because you're talking about a physical situation, right?
Right. Yeah.
It's beyond, the back office and things like that. Are you really talking about physical situations where a combination of, AMRs, sensors, and PLCs, all of that combination of all that data points that you get from these various different machines that are either on the factory line or, working with the factory line, though that kind of ability to bring it all together for the first time because of LLMs, because of this new type of AI that's available now, and particularly world models, how world models can essentially ingest and serve up ways for these machines to then be more predictive, and more responsive to change and actually learn from the environment around it. Those are the kind of things that are really, really exciting and interesting, I think, for the industrial manufacturing movement. They've already been using it for, back office kind of operations like
Sure.
customer service and, using it for their.
CRM and all that. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes, exactly. All the kind of IT. So I separate IT from transformational stuff, right? IT is good. It's important. It's, you can do all kinds of interesting, applications that allow you to collect data at speed and take action more autonomously, right? But when you start deploying it now on the factory floor, it becomes part of, truly the environment of manufacturing, right? You have a whole new level of transformation that can take place. And that's exciting.
Yeah. Jeanne, I'm going to actually add a line of questions here because of the size of these industrial companies, your role in the director governance roles and all that. But my question is more targeted towards, you'll see from the question that at these companies where there are a number of engineers and employees using prompts or agents, who is the most concerned? Or there's a follow-up question to it. Who is concerned about the leak of data?
Well, first, let's start with agents in general in these environments. I would say that full autonomous agents, which are quite different than just agents, are categorized in a whole different thing. That's the first thing that we have to think about. There are general agents that are embedded into tools and things that office workers use every day, whether it's in, Microsoft apps or in SAP or any of those areas. So let's separate that, right, from what I think of as the real potentially transformational, but also threat
Correct.
inducing type of
Yeah.
agents, right? Which are these autonomous agents. And in this space, I will tell you that across the board, whether it's, manufacturing companies, energy companies, financial companies, they're all being quite cautious in this area.
Yes.
For the simple reason that outbreaks are real, and jailbreaks are real. And so agents, it's been proven. And in fact, there's been a lot of studies on this, that you give it enough autonomy, right? You give it enough autonomy and you give it access to all these different logons and passwords and so forth. So it has access to all these different systems. It will do whatever it takes to get the job done.
Yeah.
Even if it means breaking your systems and injecting, data into the into the outside world. So that is one of the reasons why most companies are being really, really careful about this. What I often tell, not just my boards, but other people I interface with in this world is that, one, if you're going to really do autonomous agents, one, do it in experiment mode and do it on a local platform that is not connected to anything first and foremost, right? And be careful about what you give it access to, right? So because whatever you give it access to, you can assume that it's going to corrupt it in some way,
Yes.
shape, or form. If you give it an instruction that it needs to follow, and therefore, has to break the system to do it, it will do that. Right. So that is a big issue, and but at the same time, you want to be able to deploy these agents because these agents can take these. In fact, this is what my company does on the outside is we take a series of agents and they work cooperatively together to develop workflows together, right? As a team, they each have their own sort of role in what they do. And with that, you can create some amazing things, So the agentic world and the autonomous agentic world is very good, but you have to lock them down.
Yeah.
And you have to make sure that you keep it you have to think about it almost like a clean room environment.
Well, and exactly correct. And what I was getting at is that the CISOs get sleepless nights over worrying about these things, and they are they don't want to be the bearers of red flags saying don't use AI, but they want to enable it. So
That's
they
right.
are worried about that part. And then you have I hear that they want to see the technology that prevents these threats from happening before they will approve it. But then you have got lines of business owners, P&L responsibilities, who are more interested in the results.
That's right.
And they couldn't care less is not the word, but they would care less about the threats, but they're more interested in the ROI that they get out of applying using agentic AI. Do you see my point there?
Well, yeah, I would characterize it similarly, although with one slight change, and that is that at least in my companies, everyone's very, very familiar with cybersecurity threats, very interested in preventing them. We clearly have to do this in a way that allows us to be compliant and to not expose data we don't want to expose, because nobody wants to expose their business either, right?
Sure.
If they're business people, they don't want to lose their designs. They don't want to lose their product designs. They don't want to lose critical customer data. None of that is acceptable to them. But they are pushing to be able to use the technology in a safe environment. And so I think that there's a good, healthy tension between those things. And I'd say a good CISO understands and recognizes that and finds ways to create environments for these people to, get the work done. But at the same time, mitigates the risk. And there's always going to be risk, honestly, with any technology that you're going to use. So what you have to do is you have to figure out, how do you mitigate it? How do you mitigate the risk? How do you contain it if it happens? Like if something does get out, how do you contain that, right? How do you know it? And if you can't prevent 100% of it, which is impossible, then how do you then contain data that does get leaked, right? How do you then, what's your next move? So I think it's just a matter of really, putting in the right tools, putting in the right secure environments, having your secure tenants, lockdown, local AI, using technology and tools that in fact can secure agents. The way I think about agents and autonomous agents, you have to treat them like a sophisticated hacker inside of your organization. And so the tools, the cyber tools, have to literally create the rules and regulations. You have to create the rules and regulations around how that can be used in such a way that, doesn't violate your security principles, right? And so that's what the job is at hand. And that's what people are working towards.
Jeanne, I'm going to talk about since you deal with Edison and people like that, I don't know if that's an energy sector per se, but, the tension between the AI power demands and the climate goals and the demands on energy. What is your thoughts on that and what's happening? I mean, it just seems like it's a no-win situation. We need the data centers.
Yeah, yeah. And I, for sure there's going to be a ton of growth in data centers. However, I do think that we're getting a little bit in front of our skis in one sense that, nobody's doing the math or calculation on technology getting more and more efficient over time.
Yes.
Or at least they're not doing it. They're assuming it's not going to get too efficient. Right.
Yeah.
So I do think that we are getting a little bit in front of our skis where every Tom, Dick, and Harry is getting into the data center environment, whether they should be there or not. But, you cannot dispute the unprecedented growth that we've seen in this industry in the last 3 years alone and where it's going. There's no doubt it's going in a new direction, and it's going to grow faster than any other technology before our time. So yes, we need to continue to invest in data centers. Yes, they have to be ergonomic. They have to, recycle water. So I used to be in the water business. So water is a big issue in, in data centers. So recycling that water, such that it might ingest a lot at the beginning, but once it does, it never has to go tap that water again.
Right.
That's the way you want to create these environments. And the noise factor is real.
Yep.
So putting them, in acoustically contained areas, likewise not putting them in neighborhoods, right? Making sure you have big spaces between them and other people. That's going to be important. And then, of course, the heat they generate, it's a significant thing. But again, if you have good water cooling, and that technology will continue to get better and better and better, then that doesn't become such a huge issue. But of course, it is a big factor. We have to more green in our energy production overall to be able to deal with this. And what you see a lot of companies doing, whether it's Microsoft, Amazon, and so forth, they're creating their own, if you will, energy sources alongside of these data centers, so that they're not killing the local ecosystem or killing the local population with their energy usage. So that's part of the formula.
And is the use of energy in these new data centers significantly more than what we experienced during the deployment of virtual cloud infrastructure? Is it a lot more? I'm not sure. I haven't done a calculation of that.
Well, yeah, I would say that they're being absorbed faster.
Yeah.
They're being absorbed faster. And the issue is that because there's so much restrictions around any kind of new development, and the thing is, because the growth is faster in this environment than cloud, grew fast, but nowhere near what this is growing at. So there's a speed factor. And then the problem is that, local regulations on top of the friction, if you think about the local, population friction that comes with that, hasn't changed, right? And it's gotten worse.
Yeah.
So for that reason, we have a technology speeding along things that need to happen, and yet it can't go faster. And that's a problem.
Yeah, right. But again, that's between you and me. We know that problem will get addressed by technologists themselves. More efficient GPUs, CPUs, more efficient use of memory and the coolants and all that, and footprint of the data centers and so on and so forth. Plus, I think that, and the LLM themselves
they will get more efficient for sure. We already know
get more efficient. Yeah.
There's already lots of studies out there on new paths to efficiency, and whether it's in the training, inference. I think we're going to see. I think we're going to see that come down by perhaps 50-75% over time.
Exactly. So not to underestimate that. Okay, so I want to tap into your background as a entrepreneur or an investor in startups. Tell me a little bit about your journey as an investor and how you got there, and have you always been in that mode? But I'm curious how you got there. But then I have a few questions to ask you about that.
Yeah, I would say, well, first, I'm a technologist, and I spent, 22 years plus at Cisco, and a lot of executives that left when they moved on with their careers, most of them went into either investing, board work, or started another company. I decided to do all three.
Yeah, Right.
just because I had a lot of energy and I wanted to, I wanted to continue to be in the game, but I just didn't want to be in a large corporate environment on an everyday basis, right? I wanted
Yeah.
to own my schedule and
Yeah.
own my where I was going. So that was what drove me really in that direction. And part of it's just the community I live in, how much that influences me and my access to these things.
Yep.
Sometimes opportunity is sort of the best path to where you need to go next. And
Yeah.
so, all of those things pointed in all of those directions for me, at least. And I just love being an entrepreneur. I love working with entrepreneurs. I truly believe that, if you want to, if you want to have a vibrant life and continue to learn as a next generation adult, being in this environment on an everyday basis is fabulous. It
Fabulous. Yes.
gives
Yeah.
me, inspires me every day. And and I get to work with a lot of really interesting people. So that's that, it's a very simple journey. It was just sort
Did
of,
you go down the path?
the community I was in.
Yeah. But did you go down the path of becoming an LP or an individual investor? You mentioned alumni ventures, which I'm also involved in investing in AV through Bascom Ventures of University of Wisconsin. But
Yeah.
but have you been an LP in funds and things like that?
Yes. And part of my work too, when I first stepped out of Cisco, I had several companies come to me and tell me they wanted me to be, part of the company one way or the other. And, some of it was, well, I'll invest. Some of it was they just wanted to give me a share of the company to be with the company, to champion the company forward. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was a combination of all those things. And, and again, when I was at Cisco, worked alongside of a lot of the big investments that Cisco did, and it championed several of them. So I was very familiar with that environment. And, so I felt like it was just continuing what I did, but doing it, with my own lens at that point.
Sure. And, I've done the same. I spent almost 10 years with the Fabric Ventures, which was investing in the period from 2012 to 2022 in the virtualization of the infrastructure. So most of our companies were in that space. So I learned a lot, and that's continued in my knowledge going forward. So in that sense, there are so many opportunities that come your way and my way. And how do you look and evaluate an AI startup? What's your lens that you use? Top two or three things that might motivate you to take that seriously.
Yeah, well, I think it has to do with my familiarity with that area, because it's tough to invest in something you don't know a lot about. So you want to stay in some lanes where you can understand it and evaluate it well to begin with. I think that's one thing. So it has to be something of interest, something that you can and will understand and know how to guide and champion, because that's part of the deal. When you're doing it, at least with the work I've been doing. And then I think the other piece is the team. How do you look at the team? Because this and I know this, having worked with startups and having done my own startup in the past. Before Cisco, I did my own startup and took it public. The issue is that you start down one direction with a startup and you have to pivot a lot. It very rarely ends up being exactly as you had planned. So you need to be with founders. You need to feel comfortable that the founders, one, have the resilience, the intelligence, and the integrity, right, to own up to those things when it does change. Like, just recognize it quick and then pivot fast, right? And versus spending too much time trying to prove your original theory is right. It's just that. And so I look for that in I won't get involved in a startup unless somebody has both confidence and also modest in the sense of understanding they could be wrong, and that they can't, and they're willing to learn and change and evolve.
We used to use a term, but it's almost like they were malleable. They were willing to listen and change, as opposed to be very rigid. I got to do it this way and that's it. That was a very good sign of possible problems with the founders, So I agree with you.
Yeah.
And then
we're always going to look for the chameleon. The chameleons do the best in the startup world. What about you?
Yeah. And in that sense, how do you separate that promising startup from an investable company? Meaning, I think you almost answered that question, didn't you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah, I really use that. I mean, the only other thing you can look at, of course, is the speed of the customer traction.
yeah,
That's sort of the later signature that you
yeah.
get to see is the speed of the customer traction.
Right. I agree. But what are the common mistakes some of these founders make when they are trying to sell to enterprises? Let's say we're talking about a company that's building a product for SMB and enterprise. Enterprise customer acquisition is more expensive, more time consuming, more rewarding. SMB might be less time consuming, faster. But then you have the small companies, totally the small companies that you can go after. But what's your take on those three segments: small companies, SMB, and enterprise? But what are the mistakes founders make? It's almost a leading question, also you can say.
Yeah, well, I would say, and I've run into this quite a bit, where founders that enterprise wants proven products. There are
Yes,
very few there are very few enterprises that are interested in doing the co-development with you unless there are other technology companies that need it so bad and nobody else out there is offering it, and therefore they're willing to co-invest with time with you to develop that product and make it work. I think that's the biggest mistake is assuming enterprises are willing to do that in general. Most aren't. And if
true.
you are going to try to do that, go work with tech people who can't live without you. That's the
Yeah,
only way to really kind of tackle that one. That's why I always tell companies to start with smaller companies they don't have to be tiny, but they have to be small, medium companies that, are willing to do it. They're scrappy themselves. And of course, it has to start with has the most need for you, right? For example, in my AI company, everyone is going to enterprises with their offerings that aren't as good as what my AI company has, but they're offered by big brands, right? Microsoft and so forth, right? They may not be as good, they may not be as broad, they may not have all the capabilities,
yeah,
but that's hard to break through. But if you have something that is uniquely positioned to help smaller companies that don't have huge IT staffs and that really want to offer this to them, that they have a real dying need for it, then that's the right place to start. And I find that is almost always the better way to go, is to start there, prove it there first. You can always grow up to enterprise. If you look at some of the most, if you look at how Salesforce was started, Salesforce
yeah,
started that way. Almost every software company out there started that way. They also started with the SMB and then
right.
got an occasional enterprise customer here and there over time,
Yep,
but they first got it bulletproof and then moved on to enterprise.
gotcha. You mentioned your AI company a few times. Can you remind me the name of that and maybe explain what you do?
Crudel AI. Yeah.
Huh?
So
Cr-
Crudel AI
Yeah,
yeah.
Crudel
Yeah.
AI.
So yeah, they are a AI native company. What they do is they have both platforms, tools, and services, and they offer them to small, medium businesses as well as enterprises. They're agnostic. They'll use any platform. They'll create a secure environment, and they will, help you develop your agents. They're, big into agents and workflow development.
Okay, great. What does the industry need? What is changing in the role of a board director in terms of with respect to AI?
Well, I would say that the AI, what's unique about AI, unlike any other technology before its time, is that it's a democratizing tool. So it can be used for almost anything. So that's what makes it kind of unique. And so when I think about AI and I think about a board governance role, you have to think about the role that it plays in every single part of the company. Whether you're using it for audits, whether you're using it for legal, whether you're using it for IT and IT development, whether you're using it to create products, right? So give them a process, if you will, a governance schematic, right? That has each and every committee signed up to do their role, right? So those are the three standard committees every single public board has to have. Some boards also have a cyber committee. Some boards have, a technology committee. And in each one of those areas, you've got to make a list of things you're gonna watch for. So for example, even in the human capital compensation piece, you have to think about, okay, what do we need to do to inspire innovation with our compensation programs?
Sure,
How
sure.
do we think about talent and automation and what it does for our workforce and our training programs and what we
Yep.
need to think about going forward with that? What about, and in Norm and Gov, you have to think about international regulations on AI. How do we make sure that we are, subscribing and following those regulations properly if you
Yeah.
have a multi-site organization that's going to be using AI? And then, of course, we talked about our audit already, right? The financial
Mm.
controls and control systems. And then, of course, cyber, right? Cyber, it's got a huge impact to the cyber
Yeah.
discussion and governance. So those are the areas that you have to really think about. And since it impacts everything, it's a really important. Everybody has got some
It's a
level of
major,
education.
but it seems like it's a major change at the
Yes.
board level too, and some may find themselves overwhelmed by what has
Yes.
changed, and therefore boards may have to change over time.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah,
we're
one thing we didn't talk about the Prim, we didn't talk about like also the capital budgets, right? So that's another big piece of the discussion as you move from experimentation with AI to more explosive type of investment, right? It's
yeah,
real transformational investment. Part of what a board has to do is sit down and look at what the CEO is proposing for future investments and making sure there's good rationale behind that, right? And that they've done their own diligence, right? That
correct,
it's their
Jean. Yeah,
decision at the end of the day, but you approve the top line on that investment.
Jean, we're coming towards the end of our talk, but I would like to ask you if you want to project, if you will, where we are on a scale of 1 to 10 or a journey from 1 to 10 with AI, and where we will be, say, in 5 years from now.
Well, on a 1 to 10 journey, I think we're probably at about a 3.5, 4 at best.
At best, yeah.
The good news is it's pervasive. So we're in a very high growth stage, and if you think about it more in the curve of like the Gartner curve of, irrational exuberance,
Yeah, right.
hitting a peak curve, you
Mhm.
know,
Yeah,
and then disillusionment, right? Again,
yeah.
so I think we haven't hit disillusionment yet, but we've had some signs of it here and there
Hmm.
because what has happened is a lot of companies have not focused it properly and not identified where they can really create value from it. And so that's where the trough of disillusionment comes from, right? Is not being able to,
Yeah,
because it's not the lack of capability at this point. It's the lack of, it's not the lack of capability of the technology yet, although there are some things it cannot do. It's more about the capability and the thinking of how people are trying to approach it, right? And the capabilities of the people that are addressing it. So the people are trying to catch up with what the technology can currently do today, right?
yeah,
And so we're not at a point where we're pressing it to its limits yet.
yeah, right.
So I think that's why I say a 3 to a 4, because that's kind of where we are. Even though it's high growth, it's ubiquitous. It's so on that scale it'd be a 10, right? It's almost
Yeah,
ubiquitous.
yeah.
It's being used in
And
many
then,
cases.
if you look at it, say, from point of view of year 2030, even less than 5 years, but let's say 2030, where do you see us in? Will it just be a common word? It's just a piece of technology that's assumed it's there, or is
Yeah,
it?
it'll be embedded in everything. Just like we're talking about these days. If your company isn't an AI company or your company isn't a digital company, you're not a company. Where are
Yeah,
you?
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
I think it's gonna be that it's gonna move from digital is part of your company to AI is just part of who you are, and it's a matter of where it gets best applied. And we'll see it definitely in production environments across many different avenues. And you'll see, I think, a tremendous amount of disruption in companies as a result of it. A lot of companies won't make it. I
yeah,
think this is going to be one of the biggest competitive advantage tools ever of our time, right?
yeah,
I'd say the internet was certainly one of them. This is that on steroids. So I
yeah,
do believe this is going to change the makeup of both our public and private companies. It's going to kill a lot of software companies for sure, because if you just have a simple workflow tool, that anyone can create,
yeah.
that's
Watch
going to
out.
be
Yeah,
that's going to be a problem for many software companies. Yeah. So I think software companies have a lot to fear. Not
yeah,
all,
yeah,
of course. There are many that are, at this point established themselves as points of record, official points of record for data in the company. And for
Yeah.
those, it'll, it takes a long time to disrupt something like that. It takes at least 10
Yeah.
years.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. And well, so much to talk about, and certainly not the last time we're going to be talking about this subject between you and me, Jeanne. But listen, I want to close by thanking you so much. And I don't think we got all that we could cover in this short period of time, but we'll do another one as time goes by.